Margaret Wilson stood in front of her mirror, adjusting her wedding veil with a hopeful smile. The day she had dreamed of was finally here. She was about to marry Robert Henderson, a self-made millionaire and the love of her life. The ceremony was set to begin in just 1 hour, and Margaret could hardly contain the mix of excitement and nerves bubbling inside her. She imagined the life they would share, filled with love, success, and happiness. Everything was in place for the perfect beginning to their future together. The sudden ring of her phone broke the tranquility of the moment. Margaret's heart skipped a beat as she reached for it, expecting it to be a small hiccup in the wedding arrangements, or perhaps a sweet message from Robert himself. Instead, what she heard sent a shiver down her spine. Robert's voice was cold, unfamiliar. "I can't go through with this," he said bluntly. "I need to focus on my career." "I'm sorry, Margaret." The words echoed in her ears, each one a blow to her chest. Before she could respond, the line went dead, leaving her standing alone in the silent room. Margaret stared blankly at her reflection, her hands trembling as she tried to comprehend what had just happened. Her hopeful smile faded, replaced by the hollow emptiness of disbelief. The life she had imagined, the love she had believed in, crumbled before her eyes. The beautiful gown she wore, the flowers, the decorations, all of it suddenly felt meaningless, remnants of a future that had been stolen away in an instant. For what felt like hours, Margaret remained motionless, her thoughts racing in circles, trying to understand why everything had fallen apart so suddenly. But there were no answers, only the painful realization that the person she trusted most had abandoned her. Slowly, she took off the veil, her fingers shaky as she let it fall to the floor. The delicate lace lay in a heap, a stark symbol of broken promises. Margaret knew she couldn't stay in that place any longer. She couldn't wallow in the shadows of what might have been. With tears streaming down her face, she made the hardest decision of her life, to move forward. She packed her belongings, leaving behind the lavish penthouse and the memories it held. Margaret found a small, modest apartment on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't much, but it was hers. It was a place where she could begin again, rebuild her life on her own terms, free from the shadow of what she had lost. She was heartbroken, but deep down, a quiet resolve began to form. She would not let this define her. A few weeks after her devastating heartbreak, Margaret noticed something unusual: persistent morning sickness and overwhelming fatigue. She initially brushed it off as the lingering stress from her broken engagement, but when the symptoms continued, she knew she had to see a doctor. Sitting in the small examination room, Margaret anxiously waited for the doctor to return with her results. Nothing could have prepared her for what came next. "Congratulations, Margaret," the doctor said with a warm smile. "You're pregnant, and it looks like you're expecting quadruplets." Margaret's breath caught in her throat. "4," she whispered, her eyes wide with shock. The room seemed to spin around her as the news sank in. The reality of her situation was daunting. She was going to be a single mother, and not to just one baby, but to 4. She felt a mix of emotions: fear, disbelief, but also a spark of determination. This was not how she had imagined her life, but she knew she would do whatever it took for her children. Margaret made a decision right then and there. She would not contact Robert. He had made his choice, and she would make hers. She was resolute in her determination to raise these children alone, to give them the best life she could, without relying on anyone who had already let her down. It wasn't going to be easy, but Margaret knew she had to be strong, not just for herself, but for the 4 little lives growing inside her. As the months passed, Margaret's body changed, her small apartment slowly filling with baby supplies she managed to gather. Her friends, the few who had stayed by her side, offered their support, but she insisted on doing most of it on her own. When the day finally came, Margaret found herself in a whirlwind of emotions. Hours of labor later, she welcomed her 4 sons into the world: James, John, Joseph, and Jacob. The moment she held them, all the fear and exhaustion faded away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of love and purpose. They were her miracle, her reason to keep going. Raising 4 boys on her own was an incredible challenge. Margaret took on multiple jobs, working days at a local marketing agency and nights as a freelance graphic designer. She sacrificed sleep, comfort, and any semblance of a social life, but she never complained. Every smile, every giggle, every milestone her sons reached filled her heart with joy and made every sacrifice worthwhile. They were her entire world, and she poured all her love into raising them. Years passed, and Margaret thrived in her modest life. The boys grew up to be bright, energetic children, each with their own unique personality. James was the curious one, always asking questions and eager to learn. John was the protector, always looking out for his brothers. Joseph had a creative spark, drawing pictures that filled their small apartment with color. And Jacob, the youngest by mere minutes, was the joker, always finding ways to make his brothers and his mother laugh. Life wasn't easy. There were days when Margaret came home, utterly exhausted, unsure how she could keep going. But then she would see her boys, their faces lighting up when she walked through the door, and she knew she could face anything. Their laughter filled their small home, turning it into a place of warmth and love. Margaret had lost so much, but in her sons, she had found everything she needed. They were her strength, her hope, and her greatest achievement. One sunny afternoon, Margaret took her 4 boys to the local park for some much-needed relaxation. The sun was warm on her face, and the laughter of her sons, James, John, Joseph, and Jacob, filled the air as they played on the swings and chased each other across the grass. Margaret watched them with a proud smile, her heart full as she thought of how far they had come. They had faced countless struggles together, but here they were, happy and thriving. Suddenly, Margaret's gaze caught on a familiar face standing at the edge of the playground. Her breath hitched in her throat. It was Robert. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his eyes wide with shock as he watched the boys play. The years had barely changed him. He still had those piercing blue eyes and sandy blonde hair, features that were unmistakably reflected in her sons. He seemed frozen in place, his eyes moving from one child to the next, and then finally to her. Margaret's heart pounded as he approached, a hesitant expression on his face. "Margaret," he called, his voice trembling. "Are they mine?" The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of the past. Margaret hesitated, her eyes darting to her boys. She had protected them from this moment for so long, and now here it was, threatening the life she had built. "No," she lied, her voice firm, her eyes locking with his. She could see the hurt in his eyes, the disbelief, but she turned away before he could say anything more. Her priority was her children, and she wasn't going to let anyone disrupt their lives, especially not the man who had walked away when she needed him most. But Robert wasn't one to give up easily. Over the next few weeks, he kept showing up, each time more insistent. He would wait outside the boys' school, appear at the park, even knock on her apartment door. Margaret's resolve began to crack under the pressure. She couldn't keep lying forever. Finally, one evening, after yet another unexpected visit, she told him the truth. "Yes, Robert," she said, her voice filled with both exhaustion and defiance. "They are your sons. But you walked away. You left me with nothing. You don't deserve to be a part of their lives." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, she thought he might leave. But the look in his eyes told her otherwise. He wasn't going anywhere. Robert was determined to be part of their lives, and when Margaret refused to give him access, he took the next step. He filed for custody. The sight of the court papers left Margaret feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under her. She knew Robert was wealthy, influential, and had the means to fight her in ways she couldn't imagine. But Margaret was resolute. She had raised these boys alone, fought for every meal, every opportunity, every moment of joy. She wasn't going to let him take that away. The legal battle was grueling. Robert's lawyers argued that he deserved a chance to know his children, that his wealth could provide them opportunities Margaret could never dream of. Margaret, on the other hand, stood her ground. She spoke of the sacrifices she had made, of the love she had poured into raising her sons, of the countless sleepless nights and the laughter that had filled their small home. She painted a picture of a life that was full of love, if not luxury. The courtroom was tense, each hearing more draining than the last. Margaret could see the confusion and pain in Robert's eyes as he listened to her testimony. She knew he was sincere in his desire to be part of their lives now, but it didn't erase the fact that he had left. It didn't change the years of struggle she had faced alone. Margaret was heartbroken but determined. This wasn't just about custody. It was about protecting the life she had built for her boys, the stability and love they had always known. She wasn't going to let anyone take that away from them, not even their father. The courtroom became a battleground, the tension thick as both sides presented their case. Robert's lawyers were relentless, painting Margaret as an overwhelmed single mother who struggled to provide for her children. They highlighted her modest income, her small apartment, and the countless sacrifices she had to make to get by. In contrast, they presented Robert as the successful, affluent father who could offer his sons every opportunity they could ever dream of: prestigious schools, spacious homes, financial security. Margaret sat quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her, could hear the whispers of judgment from those who saw only the surface. But when her turn came, she stood up with quiet confidence, her voice steady. She shared her story, a story not of wealth but of resilience, determination, and above all, love. She spoke of the nights she stayed up, working late hours after putting her boys to bed, the times she had to make difficult choices to ensure they had everything they needed. Money doesn't raise children. Love does, she declared, her voice ringing clear and strong in the courtroom. Margaret looked directly at the judge, her eyes filled with a fierce determination. I have given my sons every ounce of love and care I have. They are happy, they are thriving, and they know they are loved. No amount of money can replace that. The room fell silent, her words hanging in the air, echoing in the stillness. The judge, a stern-looking woman with kind eyes, leaned forward, her gaze now fixed on Robert. "Mr. Henderson," she began, her voice even but probing, "you left Ms. Wilson at her most vulnerable. You abandoned her when she needed you most. Why should we trust that your intentions now are genuine? What assurance can you provide that you won't walk away again?" Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His lawyers had coached him for this moment, but now, under the judge's direct gaze, the carefully prepared responses seemed hollow. He cleared his throat, his voice cracking slightly as he spoke. "I made a mistake," he said, his eyes moving to meet Margaret's. "I was scared, selfish. I thought focusing on my career was more important. I see now that I was wrong. I missed out on the most important years of my sons' lives, and for that, I am truly sorry." He paused, his gaze falling. "I just want the chance to be their father. I want to make things right." There was a vulnerability in Robert's voice that Margaret had never heard before. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, but it wasn't enough to erase the years of pain. The years she had spent alone, struggling to give her children the life they deserved while he had focused on his career, were not something that could simply be forgiven with an apology. Margaret took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving Robert. "I don't doubt that you're sincere, Robert," she said quietly, "but sincerity doesn't change the past. You left, and while you were gone, I raised our sons. I was there for their first words, their first steps. I was there when they were sick, when they were scared, when they needed someone. You can't just walk back into their lives and expect everything to be fine." Her voice wavered for a moment, then steadied. "They deserve stability. They deserve to know they are safe and loved, without the fear of someone walking away again." The judge nodded thoughtfully, taking in both sides. "This is not an easy decision," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "It's clear that both of you love these children deeply, but love alone is not enough. The children's well-being must come first." She paused, her gaze moving between Margaret and Robert. "Mr. Henderson, I am willing to grant supervised visitation. You will need to prove, over time, that you are committed to being a stable presence in their lives." Margaret let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was enough. She looked at Robert, seeing the mix of emotions on his face: relief, regret, hope. He nodded, accepting the judge's decision. He had a long road ahead if he wanted to truly be part of their children's lives, and Margaret knew she would be watching every step of the way. As the judge adjourned the session, Margaret gathered her things, her heart heavy but resolute. This fight had been about more than custody. It had been about protecting the life she had built for her sons, the love and stability they had always known. And she wasn't done fighting, not by a long shot. She would do whatever it took to ensure her boys were safe, happy, and loved, now and always. As the custody battle dragged on, an unexpected twist changed everything. Margaret's lawyer uncovered shocking evidence that Robert's fiancée, Diane, had been manipulating the situation all along. It turned out that Diane's push for full custody wasn't driven by concern for the children. It was part of a scheme to control Robert's wealth. She had hoped that gaining custody would strengthen her influence over Robert, ensuring her place in his life and access to his fortune. Margaret felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness when the truth came to light. She had always sensed there was something more behind Robert's sudden determination to take their children, and now she knew. Confronted with Diane's betrayal, Robert was devastated. He ended their engagement immediately, distancing himself from the toxicity she had brought into his life. The realization hit him hard. He had allowed someone else to manipulate him into almost tearing his family apart. He knew he had made grave mistakes, and he was ready to make things right. Robert approached Margaret, this time without lawyers or court orders. He stood at her doorstep, his expression sincere and vulnerable. "I was wrong," he began, his voice soft but determined. "I let someone else come between us, and I almost lost everything that matters. I want to be a better father to our boys, Margaret. I'm willing to start over on your terms. I know I have no right to ask, but please, give me a chance to prove myself." Margaret studied him for a long moment. She could see the regret etched in his features, the genuine pain of someone who had realized the consequences of his actions. She didn't trust him completely, not yet, but for the sake of her sons, she decided to give him a chance. "You can see them," she said finally, her voice steady, "but it will be supervised. You need to earn their trust, just like you need to earn mine." The process of rebuilding was slow, but Robert was determined. He attended every supervised visitation, showing up on time, bringing small gifts, and spending quality time with his sons. He played soccer with them in the park, helped them with their homework, and listened to their stories. The boys, initially wary, began to warm up to him. They laughed more, their hesitations gradually fading as they saw the effort their father was making to be part of their lives. Over time, Robert proved himself. He became an active, loving father. Not just someone who wanted to be involved for appearances, but someone who genuinely cared. He took on responsibilities, like driving them to school or staying up late to help with a school project. Margaret watched cautiously from the sidelines, her heart slowly softening. She could see the difference in her sons. They were happier, more confident. They had a father now, someone who was there for them in a way Robert had never been before. Months passed, and the tension that had once defined their interactions began to ease. Margaret and Robert found a way to co-parent that worked for both of them. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of doubt and mistrust, but they were making progress. Robert was no longer the man who had walked away from his responsibilities. He was present, and he was trying every single day to make amends for the past. One afternoon, as they watched their boys play in the park, Robert turned to Margaret. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for giving me this chance. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful every day for it." Margaret nodded, her gaze fixed on their sons. "They deserve to know their father," she replied, "and they deserve to see that people can change, that mistakes can be forgiven, but only if there's real effort." A new beginning had taken root, not just for Robert and Margaret, but for their entire family. It wasn't the life Margaret had once envisioned, but it was something real, something built on love, forgiveness, and the hope that people could grow and become better, no matter the mistakes of the past. Years later, Margaret looked back on her journey with pride. She had raised 4 incredible boys while standing up for herself and her family. It hadn't been easy, but every challenge had only strengthened her resolve. Margaret had turned her pain into purpose, and she had built a life that was filled with love, resilience, and triumph. Not only had she managed to provide a stable home for her children, but she had also started her own marketing firm, creating a successful business from the ground up. Margaret's boys, James, John, Joseph, and Jacob, had grown into remarkable young men. They were kind, compassionate, and strong, each one embodying the lessons Margaret had worked so hard to instill in them. They knew the value of perseverance, the importance of integrity, and the power of love. They had watched their mother fight for them, sacrifice for them, and never give up on them. They had seen her struggle and triumph, and it had shaped who they were. Robert, too, had grown. Over the years, he had become a supportive co-parent, someone Margaret could rely on when it came to their boys. He had proven his commitment time and time again, and while the scars of the past would never fully fade, Margaret had found peace and forgiveness. She had learned to let go of the bitterness that had once held her back, choosing instead to focus on the future and the happiness of her children. Family gatherings became a time of laughter and warmth, where both Margaret and Robert could be present without the shadow of their past mistakes looming over them. They had both changed, both learned, and both grown for the better. The boys thrived in the loving environment they had worked so hard to create, a home where they knew they were safe, supported, and cherished. Margaret often reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought of the day Robert had walked away, the heartbreak she had endured, and the fear of facing motherhood alone. But she also thought of the strength she had found within herself, the joy her sons had brought her, and the pride she felt in the life she had built. She had faced betrayal, loneliness, and uncertainty, but she had come out on the other side stronger and more fulfilled than she could have ever imagined. Looking at her sons now, Margaret knew that every sacrifice had been worth it. She had given them a life filled with love and stability, and in return, they had given her purpose and joy beyond measure. She hoped that her story would be a reminder to them, and to anyone facing hardship, that no matter how dark things may seem, there is always a path forward. It may not be easy, but it will always be worth it. As she watched her boys laugh together, their faces filled with happiness, Margaret felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had triumphed, not by herself, but with her family by her side. And for that, she would always be thankful. Thank you for watching this heartfelt story of strength, resilience, and redemption. Margaret's journey reminds us that true wealth isn't about money or material possessions. It's about love, family, and the perseverance to overcome life's challenges. No matter how difficult things may seem, there is always hope, and the strength to move forward can often be found within ourselves and the people we hold dear. Margaret faced unimaginable hardships, betrayal, loneliness, and the fear of raising her children alone. But instead of giving up, she used her pain as a catalyst for growth, becoming not just a devoted mother, but also a successful entrepreneur. Her story is a powerful reminder that, even when life seems to crumble around us, we have the ability to rebuild, to transform our struggles into something beautiful. Her triumphs weren't achieved alone. Margaret had the love of her boys, the support of those around her, and eventually even the partnership of Robert, who found his own path to redemption. This story speaks to the power of forgiveness and the possibility of change. It shows us that, while mistakes may be made, there is always an opportunity for growth if we are willing to put in the effort. Margaret and Robert's journey from heartbreak to reconciliation wasn't perfect, and it took time, patience, and understanding. But in the end, they managed to create a loving environment for their children, one built on the values of respect, compassion, and resilience. What would you do if faced with a similar situation? Have you ever experienced a time when you had to rebuild your life after a setback, or found strength you didn't know you had? We'd love to hear your thoughts and stories. Share them in the comments below or email us. Your story might inspire someone else who is going through a tough time. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring tales of strength and perseverance. Together, we can celebrate the resilience of the human spirit and remind each other that, no matter what life throws at us, we have the power to overcome. We look forward to sharing more stories that uplift and inspire. Until next time, take care, stay strong, and never stop believing in your own strength. See you in the next video.